Will one of you finally give me what I desire?
Spider Cop. No.
Welcome back, true believers and all you spectacular Spidey fans, to another very exciting Marvel Spider-Man 2 related video, one which might get a bit dicey if you actually look at what we're going to be talking about today, pertaining to the entirety of where we stand with Marvel Spider-Man 2, what we currently know about it, and given the previous formats we have seen so far from Insomniac with Marvel Spider-Man 1 and Marvel Spider-Man Miles Morales. And today, I have a lovely guest joining me today with this topic, which we will discuss a plethora of various aspects about, with the one and only Highruler, who does a wonderful job of covering other Marvel games like Marvel's Avengers, which you have probably seen, as well as Marvel Spider-Man 2 and Marvel's Wolverine, as well as some Destiny 2 content. And definitely be sure to check out the Assemble podcast from fellow content creator Slight Stardust, where we did have a wonderful conversation on his channel, going over everything that you can think of relating to Marvel's Avengers, Marvel Spider-Man, and of course, Marvel Spider-Man 2. Highruler, thank you so much for joining me today. How are you doing?
I'm good, Evan. Thank you so much for having me on. I'm excited to kind of peel this back a little bit and kind of, get started on this topic, because I think there's a lot of good information that you and I can kind of go through, and there's a lot of good things that we can, have from this conversation moving forward. So yeah, I'm super excited. Thank you again for having me. And, I'm ready to start whenever you are.
There is a lot of things to analyze given the info that we already have received from Insomniac with Marvel Spider-Man 2, and of course, given the fact that we have both played Marvel Spider-Man 1 and Marvel Spider-Man Miles Morales. So essentially, we kind of know what to expect in a sense when it pertains to Marvel Spider-Man 2. However, there are still a lot of unknown factors as to what exactly Insomniac has in store for this game. And while obviously myself and Highruler are totally hyped for Marvel Spider-Man 2, especially given how awesome that first trailer was, we still have some genuine, I would say, concerns that we're just slightly worried about in terms of whether or not Insomniac will fully land a perfect execution in terms of how they're going to handle a certain part of the game. And for me personally, to start off, I would say the first factor that we have in mind is the black suit. It has been teased, obviously, at both of the post-credit scenes for Marvel Spider-Man 1 and Marvel Spider-Man Miles Morales, where Harry Osborn is in this tank where he is submerged with this symbiotic substance, which is pretty much keeping him alive from the disease that killed off his mom. And we obviously see Venom at the very end of the Marvel Spider-Man 2 teaser trailer, which is hinting towards the likely possibility that Harry is going to be Venom instead of Eddie Brock within the Insomniac universe. However, it has not been officially confirmed whether or not the black suit on Peter and or Miles is going to play a primary role within Marvel Spider-Man 2. And pretty much, we are wondering whether or not it is going to have the same amount of impact and depth that we did see in some other Spider-Man games that did also include the black suit, like Spider-Man Web of Shadows, or even the Spider-Man 3 movie tie-in game, or even Spider-Man Shattered Dimensions, where you could play as Ultimate Spider-Man also wearing the symbiote. And we're wondering whether or not that the amount of detail that is going to be featured within the black suit for Marvel Spider-Man 2 is going to have just as much, if not potentially more, layers involved within it in comparison to what we have seen in the previous Spider-Man game. So, Highruler, what do you think about this?
So this is actually a really interesting topic to kind of start off with, because I think there's actually two ways you can approach this, right? So when I'm thinking about the black suit and when I'm thinking about kind of how you integrate that with the game, you're right in the way of can the black suit have its own skill tree? Can it have its own move set? But I'm also wondering, how far do you take that, for example, right? And I'm wondering, where is that happy middle ground, right? So when I look at the black suit, I kind of think about it and I'm like, do you kind of build out this whole new animation, tree and everything to do with Peter, or do you keep it pretty simple and make it a cosmetic, right? And I think there's interesting possibilities for both. I'm stuck between those two options personally, right? So for example, if I wanted to kind of, go with, I want the whole new skill tree and I want everything to do with that, I wonder, is that really worthwhile, right? Because if I remember correctly, isn't it supposed to be black versions of all the suits from the first game? You might be able to correct me on that one if I'm misheard or not.
Yeah, there is a current rumor, which I'm sure all you viewers have heard of at this point, is that there is a potential gameplay mechanic that is going to be inputted within Marvel Spider-Man 2, that all of the alternate suits within the game are going to have a symbiote slash black suit variant, although I don't know how that would work with the undie suit, for example, but there is going to be a hopeful middle ground there where it is going to have that same breath of fresh air that we did see in the first Spider-Man game and even Miles Morales, where we got a ton of awesome alternate suits in-game that did come with their own unique suit powers. But if they go a step beyond that and have, like, say, a black suit Scarlet Spider or a black suit all-new, all-different iteration, like, there are a ton of potential options that can be included in the sequel in terms of cosmetics if they want to go that route. And of course, given how great Insomniac has been with the suits, they will obviously be included within the game for absolutely free at no additional cost. You'll just have to unlock them by playing the game. But will they still be able to go, like you said, that far in terms of giving the black suit its own amount of traversal options, combat maneuvers, gameplay mechanics, its own story that really showcases exactly how far Peter might fall if he is overwhelmed by the symbiote if it does go onto him, turning him into Black Suit Spider-Man instead of simply making Harry Venom, and that's it. I really hope they do make this a darker tone story like Bill Roseman has already said, but truly dive into that fully by giving us that core Black Suit narrative with Peter, and also how that affects his relationships with Miles, Mary Jane, maybe the return of Black Cat, and just all the other side supporting characters in the game that really made what was so special about each of the previous Insomniac Spider-Man games that we have already played through.
Yeah, it's very interesting to think about it, because I think a lot of people have their own different interpretations of the black suit and how it acts and how it integrates with Peter. And we've seen it across many different mediums before. You know, I look at Chip Zdarsky just wrote a What If comic where Peter never takes the black suit off when he comes back from Battleworld, I believe. So it's set all the way in the past. And it was a really good comic because it explored the way it affects the mentality of Peter, right? It really explores that kind of side and how he loses it. But you never really see him go too crazy with the black suit in that one, right? You never really see him do anything that is over the top with it, right? So I'm wondering, what kind of inspiration does Insomniac go with the black suit? Do they kind of keep it simple and keep it, you know, just a cosmetic, for example, and maybe you get some passive buffs to his stats? Or do they go that next step, right? Like you were saying, do they do that, that skill tree, that those unique animations, kind of take it that next step? And from my understanding of the way I've read some of these conversations online, is that it seems like there might be a little bit of a split there in terms of what people are looking for, which I think is going to... I mean, it's tough because I feel like a lot of the time, you know, Insomniac can make a really good change, or there's something that could happen to Spider-Man, but there's always that split, right? Because I think one of the big things about Spider-Man is that he's such an important character to a lot of people, right? And there's all these different kind of interpretations of the character, and there's all these different interpretations of these different things that happen to him, you know, specifically Black Suit on this particular topic. But because of that, people interpret these things very differently, and it can kind of, I don't want to say make or break, but it can definitely kind of change the way people view that certain characteristic, or maybe that certain medium that Peter's coming across in. And I think it'll be really interesting when it comes to sequels and how sequels try to go bigger, and, you know, all that sort of stuff that we see in not just games, but Hollywood and, you know, all that sort of stuff. I don't know if I want it to be this next bigger and crazier thing, right? Like, I'm someone, when I look at a sequel, just do what you did, but do it a little bit bigger, right? Maybe expand on something like a very emotional story beat that you want to do, right? My worry with Spider-Man 2, and we could tie this back with the symbiote, is that everything is going to get so much bigger that it loses itself a little bit, right? And I wonder if we might see that, and maybe there might be some potential issues there because of the way they might handle the symbiote suit. And, you know, and once again, I acknowledge that this is going to be a very divisive topic, because some people want that crazy symbiote action, they want that crazy unique animations, they want that skill tree, right? So I know that what I'm saying is probably not going to be in the majority, but I must recognize there still is a percentage of people that probably just want it to be a cosmetic with maybe some passive buffs, I would imagine. And I would probably sit on that as well.
And I think that actually really ties into, I would say, the second point that we have to talk about, at least for me, is not only is how crucial of a role the black suit will play within the game, of course, making it a core gameplay mechanic, a really heavy story beat, and seeing that transition from potentially black suit Spider-Man into Venom, but also, in my opinion, the story itself relating to Peter and Miles Morales. Because in the first game, obviously, Marvel Spider-Man 1, that was a Peter Parker story through and through, with the addition of playing as Mary Jane and Miles Morales as side characters, while still being Peter Parker's story, and even in turn a Doc Ock origin story, which I thought was really, really cool. Then we got a solo spin-off standalone Miles Morales game, which was all about Miles and him becoming his own Spider-Man, which was great. However, the reason why that game exists is because Insomniac already set a great foundation with Miles in the first game to then evolve him even further in his own game, which made him the main character. But here, for Marvel Spider-Man 2, this is the official sequel of not Miles Morales' game, even though he is a crucial part of the story, but still, this is the official sequel to the first Marvel Spider-Man game where Peter was the main character. So the reason why I bring this up is because I really hope that Insomniac does balance the amount of screen time that we do get with Peter and Miles respectively, but at its core, I do really want this to focus on Peter as the primary main character that we grew with in the first game, saw bits of in Miles' game, but really expand upon and evolve further within Marvel's Spider-Man 2. I'm very excited to play as Peter and Miles, do not get me wrong, but at its foundational core, it should still be a Peter Parker story with him trying to deal with Kraven the Hunter coming into town, trying to still mentor Miles as Spider-Man, even though they're now pretty much partners at this point instead of viewing him as a sidekick or something. And also, of course, dealing with the realization that his best friend, Harry Osborn, is inevitably going to turn into this monster with Venom. And how all those things blend into each other is going to be very intriguing to see from both Peter and Miles' perspectives, but still keep it focused on Peter as why we are there in the first place.
I 100% agree with you, actually, because when you think about sequels to games and the movies and stuff, and, you know, people in the comments can tell me I'm wrong or tell me I'm right, and, you know, even yourself, Evan, it seems like sequels always try to one-up what the predecessor is, right? And I think there's definitely a worry when it comes to sequels, how you kind of retain the core and the heart of what you actually did with that first game, right? You nailed it, right? That first Spider-Man game was a Peter Parker story. Of course, there were side missions, but at the heart of it, it was a Peter Parker story. Miles was a Miles story, right? And while there's different elements that are taking place in these different games, the core and the heart is exactly that. And I think there's definitely a worry, not just kind of blending these two characters into one narrative, but once again, how do you kind of keep everything at that core of a really grounded story, right? So, for example, I thought the first Spider-Man story was really good. I thought Miles was really good, right? Because there was these narrative beats that they hit, and at the end of, you know, Spider-Man 1, when obviously, spoiler alert, I guess, when Aunt May dies, like, that's a very emotional moment there, right? And it's because you care about this Aunt May, you care about what she means to Peter, that you're able to kind of walk away from that going, wow, that really tugged on my heartstrings there, right? And sometimes when you blow a story up and you make it so big, and you can see it with like different IPs and, you know, so on and so forth, when they have a very grounded first story and you really connect with it, when it really resonates with you, but then they move on, they're like, oh, this is like the end of the world threat right there. And it doesn't really resonate the same with you at that point, because you're moving the story away from this very inner focus to this very outer focus. And I wonder if we might get something like that, you know, where it's, you know, now you have, you know, Venom and Kraven, and you're trying, Peter's trying to mentor Miles still, right? Like, there's so many things going on that I hope that the narrative isn't lost in itself. I hope there's still that heart and that familiarity with everything going on, that this still can be a Peter Parker story primarily, while still trying to tie in all these secondary elements to really make it that heartfelt story that I hope a lot of us, I would think a lot of us are hoping for at that point, at least myself, right? And I say this and people come at me for this, but it's very hard to catch lightning twice, right? And of course, we've seen, Insomniac really do well with Spider-Man 1, and then obviously the little bit of a spinoff with Miles there. But like, this is a full-blown sequel. This is not a spinoff. This is not, kind of a DLC story. This is a sequel, right? And I treat a sequel very differently from a spinoff. And I think a lot of people should maybe take that into consideration, because, I say, like, it's very hard to catch lightning in a bottle. And, the response I get is, they did Miles. And it's like, yeah, but like, that's in its own way, I guess, a fresh start for a character using the environment that is built. But I would still treat that differently. Spider-Man 1 is, the first block. Miles is like 1.5, right? And then you have Spider-Man 2, which is the second block, right? So I view sequels very differently, and I view them with a lot of skepticism because I've seen so many times that sequels just absolutely do things the wrong way. And I hope Insomniac and Marvel Games and their partners are able to recognize that you don't have to go bigger to do better. You just have to do what really resonated and then do that better,
And the last point that we did want to touch upon here for Marvel Spider-Man 2 is, once again, knowing that it is a fully PlayStation 5 exclusive running only on that one console, and whether or not the game itself will justify its exclusiveness. And what I mean by that is, once again, Spider-Man PS4 was a PlayStation 4 exclusive, and it was remastered on the PlayStation 5 with the brand new Peter Parker face model, updated visuals, 60 frames per second, DualSense capabilities, all this additional stuff to quote-unquote polish the game. However, if you still played the base game on your PS4 or PS4 Pro, it still looks and runs pretty damn well. And the same thing can be said, at least for me personally, with Miles Morales, where I did play the game on both PS4 Pro and PlayStation 5. And while there is a significant performance difference that is way better on the PS5 in comparison to the PS4, I still personally think it looks and runs just fine on my PS4 Pro platform. And knowing that Marvel Spider-Man 2 is going to take advantage of the PlayStation 5, since this is in fact developed from the ground up on that console, what type of gameplay elements or features is truly going to differentiate it from the previous Insomniac Spider-Man games that will genuinely make it feel like a complete next-gen experience?
Honestly, this is probably like the best question that we can pose, because this is going to be such a big thing when the game comes out, right? Because those questions are going to be asked, right? People are going to say, what makes this game so much better than what you just brought up, right? Horizon Forbidden West, which was, from all accounts, a really good cross-platform game, right? I've seen a lot of people praise the performance, the way the world looks, and everything to do with that game on the PS4. So when Spider-Man comes out, what is going to justify people, granted, we don't know how the supply situation is going to look, but what's going to justify, kind of that kind of endeavor, right? Whether it's the time, money, or effort to get a PS5 at that point in time, right? Now, you're right when, you look at the games as they are on both PS4 and PS5, they play just fine, right? Like, obviously, the performance boost a little bit, maybe some graphic fidelity a little bit. But like, at the end of the day, unless there's significant changes to the world and how the world works and all these different NPCs, I don't see how they're going to make it that much better, right? Like, you can look at, like, it's going to be 4K, it's going to have all this stuff, and that's all well and good, right? But like, if it's not really changing or making the gameplay a lot better, is it really worth it making that next gen, that pure next gen experience? And what we're seeing right now out of, once again, Horizon, similar games, is that it may not be a benefit as a lot of people were thinking, right? Like, you can still do a really good next-gen game with having that last-gen game as well, right? You just need a really good dev team to pull it off. And, Insomniac, like Guerrilla, have proved this far that they are able to do it. So to me anyways, I don't see what they're going for here until we get more details. Once again, it has to be like the world is a lot more livelier. There's a lot more things going on. And maybe that's part of it, right? Kind of loading all these different NPCs and all these things that are happening. I say this knowing that the New York City that we have gotten has been pretty lively this far in the games that we've gotten, right? Like, I'm not thinking about it and going, oh, like there weren't NPCs there weren't NPCs here. Like, the cars are moving, the people are walking, like, I just, to me anyways, I look at it, I'm like, you guys really got to nail something here, because there are going to be a lot of people upset that they're not able to play Spider-Man because you made it next gen. And if you guys don't have any sort of, kind of like, oh, wow moment, it's not going to go over quite well. At least I think so anyways.
Absolutely, because if we look at Insomniac's previous catalog, with them already kind of diving into and pretty much carrying the beginning of the PlayStation 5's lifecycle, Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart is an excellent game, and it definitely is one of the best showpiece titles on the PlayStation 5, with seamlessly transitioning from world to world with the SSD and fast loading times. The graphics look insane, story was great, gameplay felt extremely smooth and fun with the intense immersion of the DualSense controller adding into that, and again, just having those next-gen expectations, like you said, the oh wow moment with the incredible performances and facial animations coming off of Ratchet and Rivet and Clank and all the other supporting characters. Just minuscule details like that really brought the game to life. And again, that is at the very beginning of the PlayStation 5's lifecycle. Here, with Marvel's Spider-Man Remastered and Miles Morales still being cross-gen games, with the PS4 version of Marvel's Spider-Man being the main game and then the remaster just kind of being a polished version of that, it still really did give a glimpse as to what the future is for Spider-Man on next gen, showing, wow, the PS5 really can kind of polish and revitalize these visual details in a new way that wasn't possible before on the PlayStation 4, with slight additions of the VFX looking a bit more realistic, the textures, graphic capabilities of the environments in New York City, and the character models looking very, very detailed, and especially, which gives me a lot of confidence right now in Marvel's Spider-Man 2, knowing that the initial teaser trailer that we saw was in fact footage of the game running in real time. That was not CG, that was the actual visuals for the game. As it stands right now, with the inevitable possibility that they will be even more polished by the time the game releases next year in 2023, which gets me extremely excited to see the performances coming off of all the main characters like Peter and Miles, and of course our boy Venom getting probably one of, if not the most visually detailed character models we've ever seen on that character, which is going to completely immerse me even more within the world, the story, and the characters that are surrounding the entire experience. And again, taking that a step further in comparison to something like a TV show or a movie, where the game and its features are enhanced through and through with the capabilities of the next-gen console with the PS5, is really going to, like you said, make or break the experience. But in this case, I definitely think that is the concern that we are less worried about, but definitely something that we really want to see be blown out of the water by the time the game releases, and truly just be stunned by with everything and anything that Insomniac can incorporate within the core gameplay elements and the visual capabilities that will be poured into everything that this game will feature.
100%, you nailed it, right? And you brought up a really good point, because Insomniac came out with Ratchet & Clank. They said, hey, like, this has to be next gen because of the way you're able to kind of port around, right? You're able to walk through those portals, right? If they come out and they're like, hey, we had to make this next gen, and here's why, right? And they unveil some crazy new gameplay element, people are going to be like, okay, right? Because I think there was people who were disappointed still with Ratchet & Clank only being next gen, but it was made understandable by what they were doing, right? They were utilizing the tech in such a way that it made sense, right? So Insomniac, once again, could come out and be like, hey, this is what we're doing, and this is why we have to go next gen, and people would, still some would be upset, granted, but I think there would be a lot more people who would be like, you know what? You guys are doing some really cool stuff. We appreciate it. We like what you're doing and what we're seeing, and because of that, let's go, let's do it, right? And I think we're just waiting on that information, right? And I think depending on how the information kind of settles and where it kind of sits, the reaction will follow at that point. But I mean, at the end of the day, one of the things that I see a lot online is that Insomniac are very good at what they do, right? They are very good at making their games. They are very good at doing everything that they can do with these video games. So I think there's a lot of leeway that people give them. And, I think it's a matter of, like, the leeway's there until it's not there, right? So, I mean, we're talking about potential issues and potential things that could happen. And obviously, I don't think anyone wants any of these things to come true, right? Like, we don't want them to come out and say, like, hey, we're just making a next-gen exclusive for no reason, right? No one really wants that, right? Because at the end of the day, everyone just wants a really fun Spider-Man game. But I think that is a very big question that Insomniac will have to answer whenever the marketing does start to ramp up towards, I would assume, the end of this year, going into next year, possibly, whenever Spider-Man 2 is going to come out. So, yeah, I mean, it's definitely an interesting question talking about next-gen exclusivity and what it really does mean, because we've seen examples go both ways of how dev teams can utilize just next gen, and then how dev teams can utilize cross gen and do both very, very well.
And with all that said, everybody, that is the video that Highruler and I both have for you today. Thank you all so much for watching. Let us know all your thoughts in the comment section down below. What do you think about Marvel Spider-Man 2 and the biggest concerns that we currently have about the game, even though we are obviously still both extremely hyped for everything that the game will entail and can't wait to see more of it. We're just keeping our expectations realistic and hoping for the best possible outcome by the time the game releases next year in 2023. Do you share any similar concerns? Do you have any other concerns that we didn't talk about? Let us know. Thank you all so much for watching. Leave a like on the video. Subscribe to both of our channels if you did enjoy, and for more Marvel Spider-Man 2 videos like this in the future. And I could not do this video in particular without the wonderful Highruler joining me on this. Thank you so much, dude. I had a wonderful time.
Thank you, and I appreciate you bringing me on and getting the chance to talk Spider-Man. It really was a great time, and I'm really appreciative of everything that you do for the Spider-Man community, and I'm really appreciative of everyone who watches and engages with this, because Evan's a great guy. He does a lot of good content around Spider-Man and Marvel games, so I hope everyone watches and appreciates what Evan does.
And with all that said, everybody, thank you all so much for watching. Stay spectacular, Spidey fans, and peace out.